Hey there, everyone. So we are here today. We decided to go on a little adventure in a place called the Arb in Ann Arbor. And it's really, really, really refreshing to be here in general. And today is just going to be a day for us to meditate and record a bunch of different kinds of videos, and we'll post them as time comes along. We've been really just talking about a bunch of different kinds of topics. And one of the topics really is telepathy. Something that we really want to share with people is telepathy. Now, when we're in 5D reality and you're experiencing 5D with other people, you're going to notice that telepathy comes in handy like crazy, because there's certain things you can't communicate with people verbally, so you end up having to rely on all these extra senses, and you can send people images, like feelings, interpretations on top of words, so that your whole entire message gets sent to that person. And one of the best ways to really practice doing telepathy in general is practicing with your pets. And that's why we're sitting here with Artemis and Muck. And basically what we have done, because both of our dogs are service dogs, and we have both, before we even met, we both developed telepathy with our pets. And then we started talking about it, and we started realizing, like, whoa, okay, we're not the only people that have done this. Now, I grew up kind of being taught my entire life that animals have feelings, and that animals are people that are in the 2D realm waiting to incarnate themselves once they figure out the grander lesson of their existence in the 3D realm. So I, as a kid, I was taught that when you get a pet, you make that pet your familiar, and you work with that pet, making it as conscious, as sentient as possible. So by the time that your pet dies, it has the opportunity to incarnate itself as a person in the next lifetime. So, like, how are some ways that you use telepathy with Muck? Like, what are some tips? Like, what other things do you think that people need to hear about that?
So I honestly, first I trained him verbally, and then all of the commands that I had with I had a verbal command for, I started using that verbal command through telepathic means. And then I started training him with telepathy and really anchoring in sit, stay, the typical commands that most dogs it's useful for most dogs to know and understand, and those commands are easier to be given in a public setting mentally sometimes than verbally, because it's that dual language. Telepathy is another form of language, just like speaking Spanish or French or German or any of those other languages. It is its own language. So teaching him that gives him more consciousness, more feeling. He's more in tune with me, which is huge with him being a service dog, because that's part of his job is to make sure that I'm okay. That's why he's a service dog, is if something were to happen to me, he can go get somebody, and having that telepathic communication with him, maybe I can't talk, but he can pick up that wave and go get help. And so those are some of the biggest things that I've realized, having that connection with him, especially in everyday life.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, talking about telepathy and telepathy being a language. A lot of times people see telepathy and they're like, oh, well, I have to do it all mind to mind. Well, telepathy is a brand new language. When you embark in any language that you're learning for the first time, you have to step into it with an open mind. You have to make mistakes. You have to be daring to be wrong so you can learn. And that's one of the things, when it comes to a lot of esoteric arts like this, telepathy, really, honestly, everyone's born telepathic. We just totally forgot how to talk telepathic. And really, even though me being someone who grew up understanding that, every spirit equates to something and must be honored, it wasn't until I started really using telepathy with my pets that I I started noticing that they felt even more valued and they became more sentient because now we're talking at the same level. Animals don't have the ability to create verbal language to communicate with people. They can create sounds, they can create like movements, body movements to really communicate with other people. But ultimately, language, the way we communicate with language is not something that they do. So how is it possible? And this is what really opened the door for me, was like, I come from roots of like Native American shamanism. The Tainos are the Native American people of Puerto Rico, and like they were really heavy on nature and alchemy and being one with nature, and they used to speak about being able to talk to the animals and the animals talking back. It's not a metaphor that they were talking to animals. They were telepathically communicating with these animals, and the only way that they got there is by understanding that, hey, like, they speak on a different vibration. They speak heart to heart, emotion to emotion. They speak at a soul level. And you'll notice that if you just start practicing this little by little with your pets, and just like he had said, like, I started off teaching him all the base commands, like sit, stay, whatever. And I've done this with different kinds of dogs already. So like the first dog that I did it with, who's passed away now, I taught him how to do regular commands vocally. Then I did like hand movements, stuff like that, so that he would learn how to do that. And then there came moments where I was like, okay, well, when I do this command, I have a certain kind of vibration, you know. When I say no, you know, and I could easily just go like, and he'd know I would mean no. But I noticed every time I would do this, even talking to him silently, I would still emit that energy of like, if I were saying it verbally, like no, you know what I mean? And that's when I started realizing, okay, well, that vibration that I feel is an emotion that comes out of me. So this has to somehow play into telepathy, right? Because they're emotion to emotion animals, especially a service dog picks up on your emotions. So it makes sense if you're looking at your dog and you're like, okay, I'm not going to say anything, but I'm going to emit no, right? And I'm not going to even use my finger. And in my mind, I'm like, no. And he'll stop. And like a lot of times your animal will freak out the first couple times when it happens, because he knows you're talking to him, but he's not used to you not using your mouth, but he can clearly hear the command. So then there's times where like, and you've even talked about it, where they get angry at you because they're like, well, you're not talking to me with your mouth. And like, if you're not talking to me with your mouth, I'm not going to be listening because you're not really doing anything. So it's like you got to develop this relationship. And a lot of times you're going to get annoyed, especially training one of your pets to be telepathic, because they're so used to having verbal commands that even though they talk telepathically, most likely between themselves as well, and the environment, because your environment is telepathic and it's always talking to you, like you have to train them to get to used to you being telepathic, because all of their race has been taught that we don't know how to do that. So in a way, like they get really annoyed because they're like, oh, but use your mouth. If you really have something to say to me, use your mouth. But it's like, I don't want to. So try these experiments, and like sometimes you'll say something to them telepathically and his ear will like move around and or even look at you and then kind of just look away like, oh, you didn't really say anything, whatever. You know, you got to be patient with it. Ultimately, your animal will respond and be like, okay, this is part of the normal thing that you were going to be doing, and they'll play along with it.
Everyday practice is huge. Like that's where I noticed the most change was when what I did with him is the morning routine of me getting up, taking him out, feeding him. Like I would take him out silently, tell him to come back inside silently, telepathically. And then when I would go to feed him, I always have him sit down and wait until I give him the command to eat, just so he has like a little bit of a routine there. So I started making him sit like telepathically and then giving him the command to eat telepathically. And now sometimes when I tell him to eat, like he wants a verbal command so he doesn't get in trouble, because there have been times where he's, done things and he may have thought I gave him the command or someone else gave him the command and like he got scolded. So like you just have to like play with it and like keep experimenting and positive reassurance with them through the whole thing, because you're building a brand new relationship. Like Axel said, like they think that we don't know how to do this, but we were 2D at one point in time as well, so we know how to. We have just forgotten. So that's like having that relationship. It will be very natural as it builds itself.
Yeah, definitely. And then once you get a hang of talking to your animals in a telepathic fashion, where you start you start understanding telepathy because you're talking to them. Like, if your command, when you say no, has a certain vibration behind it, then like, okay, you can start breaking down your own emotions and understanding, okay, when I say something to someone, this is the vibration I put out emotionally. So then you can when you're talking to another person telepathically, even if the person doesn't understand telepathy, they will still respond. That's one of the things that I really got used to after training Art and my other pets, was like, let me see if I can communicate with the post lady who doesn't know anything about telepathy, and see if she'll still respond to whatever I'm saying to her underneath it all. And they do, because telepathy essentially is like subconscious to subconscious talking. But at that point, if two people are talking subconsciously, are they not conscious? You know what I mean? Of what's going on, even though the only way it's a subconscious conversation is if the other person doesn't understand telepathy, right? So that's one way, like, you can really start mastering telepathy, is starting right at home with your pet. And then another thing I really want to throw out there, every once in a while I'll sit down and I'll give him a set of commands, like sit, lay down, come over here. And it's all telepathic, no movements, nothing, just sending him pure telepathy. And practice with it, because you're going to start off first with like emitting the emotion. You'll understand that, and then you'll emit how to send the thought, which could be like, you see the dog actually sitting down, and then that's your command saying, okay, this is what I want you to do. You see him sitting down, and he'll pick up on that and then do it. Every time he does a drill like that, whether it's your cat or your dog or another pet, reward them. Give them a treat. Don't make it seem like, oh, you just have to get used to talking to me telepathically because that's just the new status quo. Motivate them to want to talk to you that way more often. That way they respect you, and they respect the fact that you both are having this more intimate connection. Now, because of it, that's one of those things that when we talk about familiars a lot, and that's something that some people really want. They want a pet that embodies their emotions or their spirit of some sort. This is how you start creating a familiar, a being that can talk to you like it can't talk to anyone else. And then you develop a relationship that's so emotionally based, so energetically based, that this animal then starts incorporating key characteristics of yourself. Now, and it's really crazy, because when you're creating a familiar is like almost like a mini reflection to yourself. And like, as that familiar becomes more conscious, you start seeing your best traits and also your very negative traits, like inside of this little thing right here, right? And it's cool because it shows you, okay, these are the things I got to work on myself. And every time you work on something in yourself, they usually follow, because they're now an extension of your own energy as well. And even though they don't follow, your relationship becomes even better, because you're understanding more about yourself, which is only an extension of yourself. So you're understanding him even better as well.
Yeah, that's a huge piece too, is like, through training your pet telepathically, like, you will learn so much about you subconsciously, because then you really do. It's almost like training a child in a way,
Mm-hmm.
like, or raising a child. Like, you start seeing like all of you reflected that you weren't even aware of, and then it's like another tool within your reality that you can use to reprogram your reality. And so it's like it's all like interconnected in building a new earth and being of that type of resonance. Mm-hmm. So like, it all like interlinks beautifully.
Yeah, so we're really recently huge on trying to educate everyone and give people as many resources as possible to become a new earther, and like learn how we've become new earthers so we can get there even faster. And one of the things you got to start doing is, like, in a previous video we talked about, what are your priorities? You got to reprioritize yourself, and now you got to step into another step of your lifestyle as a new earther in 5D, which is understanding your animals are conscious. Every animal is conscious. And like, it's really cool. Like, there's certain, I can't remember what country it is, but some country recently made every animal have sentient rights. and I think it was Sweden or Norway or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Which is, once you start having this type of connection with just your house pet, there comes this point where you just start realizing, like, every being out there, regardless of a spider or an ant or a bird, has a consciousness, and it will talk to you if you give it its respect. A lot of times too, when people are doing telepathy, they feel superior to the being that they're talking to, because I'm a human, I have consciousness, I can do all these other things, look at what the human race has done altogether. But you just devalue the fact that the dog still has a very important role in all of existence, and without it, like, you're screwed. So it's almost like you have to talk to him as your peer. But also, ultimately, in one of my animal Reiki courses, I talk about, like, when you're dealing with animals out in the wild, you talk to the animal, you deal with that animal as a peer. With your house animal, it's more so like a child, because that's your baby. You grew up with this baby, and you can get a very nice general feel for him in general. And it's just very enlightening, and it opens up all doors to not only just communicating with animals and other people once you get a hang of communicating with animals, because remember, people are essentially animals. So like, when you really learn how to do this type of telepathy, you can upgrade to human telepathy. And then once you master a little bit of how humans talk a little bit differently with their telepathic response, you can then evolve to a state where we're at, where in the mornings we'll be talking about certain things, and we're like, I can't put this into words, and everyone is just like, show us telepathically, show us the diagram, whatever. And then all of a sudden it becomes easier to talk. You start saying certain things, and then there's these diagrams that play out, and everyone's witnessing the same diagram. And we even check in at times just to be like, are you sure we're all seeing the same thing, right? Yeah, I saw it this way, and it explains this one thing. And because we're all seeing the bigger picture, we're not being limited to the linear state of talking. We can understand even more information and share bits and pieces of information as we telepathically talk that comes to each individual. So like, he'll see a certain thing and understand a certain perception. I'll see a certain perception. Everyone else in the group will see a different perception, and we're like, holy crap, like, this is the missing piece to what you were just saying right now. And it's very powerful. So if you're in if you're in the alchemy class, you have experienced telepathy at some point. Is one of the things that comes with being part of the system, like learning the system. And if you've done any of the workshops that, like, I've run particularly, and you've definitely experienced it at some point. And Master Micah is all about soul. So like, when you guys start working with him, and some of the really cool projects that we're going to be having out this year, some courses that me and my fellow Ascended Masters, we're all like really pumping it in now, like we're in hyperdrive, you'll be able to practice these things even more. But we wanted to give you this little insight so you can go ahead and start working at home whenever you're ready, and just get a head start. Instead of waiting for a course, how about you start working on it right now, you know?